Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 57 of Relating to DevSecOps, where we explore the development, security, and operational issues of today so that we can solve real-world problems with people that face them. I'm your host, Ken Toller, and I'm joined again by Mike, my co-host. We are back into nighttime recording, as you can see by my lovely purple and blue color-themed lights. Mike, what do you think about the new setup for tonight?
Yeah, it looks good. It looks like a singles night for farmers based on your dress.
Yeah. Well, hey, when you're doing some yard work, farmers only, baby. Let's get it done. So, all right. You probably didn't tune in for this podcast, but we're in it anyway. Within the first few seconds here. So look, Mike, we were talking a little bit before the show and the pre-show about things that we could sort of take the conversation into before we start bringing on our guests. And I think we're moving a little bit back into maybe some of the softer side of things or I guess the administrative side of things here tonight in basically how we make security decisions in complex environments. And I'll say even complex people environments, because I think, we always talk about sort of technical solves or automation or all the tooling, and we really obviously focus this podcast on people. And I want to sort of unpack some of the ideas and maybe some of the experiences that you and I have had in trying to get security decisions made and sort of techniques that we can use to solve problems with people. And I think that both of us had sort of come up with a laundry list of issues that we face that we have been able to solve in that way. And we've both had our sort of asides to that. So I do want to open it up with that conversation. Any initial thoughts or anything you wanted to add just based on our conversation before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very relevant, pertinent topic because so many times when we're trying to make decisions in the security world, it's always a balance between getting things done, and then someone is always worried about, being hacked or breached or something like that along those lines. So it's always this dichotomy of those two things being balanced. And I feel like a lot of times security decisions don't get made by the best reasoning. So it's good to kind of take a step back and talk about how they're done, issues we see, and kind of how you can solve some of these things.
Yep, exactly. And so we've titled these, just in our note-taking session in some entertaining ways. And I think that the first one you've just sort of mentioned is taking a step back. So what do you mean by taking a step back? What are some, I guess, issues that you would face as a security practitioner in an organization where you'd have to sort of take a step back?
I mean, I think of two different cases where this seems to happen a lot. One is when people are trying to solve a security issue, and they really dig deep into an issue, get a huge amount of people on the phone to solve an issue that may be very hard to solve technically. When really, if they just took a step back and said, okay, can we solve this somewhere else? Solve it up the chain, solve it in some other way. Don't think about how you have to solve it at the very end. Solve it at the beginning. So you focus all this time trying to solve this one hard technical issue versus trying to, root cause kind of fix. And I feel like that happens a lot as we get obsessed with the issue we want to solve. We want to be, problem solvers. We want to make sure we fix the security hole versus going back to design or first principles of what's the actual issue at hand and how do we fix it, maybe from a design perspective, architecture, process, whatever it is. But, that's something we need to do sometimes if we get too down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And I think, we get into this situation with vulnerabilities too, right? We sort of want to solve what is the vulnerability, how do we solve it? And we're always talking about finding the root cause. And so I think you're talking about taking the step back to see, are we solving the right problem or are we just solving a problem?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you just sort of reminded me of is, and we've talked about it in conferences, when you're submitting to conferences, submit to developer conferences and submit to other conferences. We've talked about that on the show a few times. but it kind of reminds me of the security echo chamber. Is like, when you are thinking about security, are you only talking to security people about solving the issue, and is it isolated to your security team? Like, I think that a lot of times in the past I've had situations where I've been talking to other security verticals like infosec and netsec and things, and I've been collaborative in that way. But sometimes we just get into our security echo chamber, we make a decision, but we haven't actually truly incorporated all of the input from the teams that we are affecting. And I think we've all seen this in, operational issues that we face with how we access things and permissions and things of that nature. So also just taking a step back if you find yourself only having conversations with security people.
Yeah. You kind of reminded me, a couple people have reached out recently to say, how do I get into security? And one of the points that I made to them was, don't think about like security as its own skill set, but think about how you're securing something. Like, we're not just doing security out in a vacuum. Like, we're securing AWS, or we're securing firewalls, we're securing databases, we're securing a payments process system. Like, it could be anything, but you're securing a thing. So you have to understand that first. And it's the same thing from a problem solving perspective. When you don't have a complete understanding, or at least a good enough understanding of how the system works, and you're trying to solve a security issue because that's what you were, asked to solve, you have to make sure you have that baseline in place, so you're not, coming up with a solution that doesn't make any sense. Or again, making a complex solution out of something that could be way more simple.
Yeah. And that kind of takes us to our next little title, I guess, which is reframing issues, right? We've talked about, you're sort of talking about these complex problems that you're trying to solve. And if you're not looking at it as security as part of the product, rather than adding security onto a product or onto an issue that you're having, you are probably missing some things that you're that are there right in front of your face when it comes to, how do I solve the issue? Maybe it's not just like adding a security function. So reframing issues is another one. Do you have a story behind that? Because I think that really sort of came from your brain.
I don't know if I have a story that comes to mind. I'm sure I can think of one, but yeah, I mean, I think we, again, I think security has the mindset going into things of, standards, compliance, security requirements, things like that, versus overall risk of issues, and thinking things, really through about what the real risk is, versus just saying, oh, this is out of compliance, therefore it's a high risk. One of those things that I can come up with is encryption in the cloud. Like, we're always talking about, like, it is a compliance requirement to have your data encrypted. Now, if your data is not encrypted in an RDS, what is the threat that you're like worried about? Someone walking out of a data center with an RDS, hard drive. So like, we get obsessed with those kinds of things, don't think about the real risk. Obviously, that's kind of a dumb one, because like, just click the encrypt button. It's not that big of a deal, but those are the kind of things that, like, we spend so much time, and I feel the same way about cross-site scripting. We spent years and years trying to solve cross-site scripting, and how many people do we know who've been hacked via cross-site scripting versus just like out-of-date software because they didn't patch. They didn't have a patch process, or patching, which is really difficult. So, yeah, I mean, I think of those examples. Do you have any good examples?
Well, I do want to comment on yours, because I saw something on LinkedIn the other day, and it's the CISO, and I won't name them, but they're kind of doing the troll approach for clicks, where it's like, encryption doesn't matter anymore.
That's LinkedIn for you. Oh, I think I saw that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of the same sentiment that you're having, because like, you go through the comments and he goes, well, I didn't say don't encrypt. I just said, it's overrated or overhyped. And I think that the sentiment there is kind of what you're saying, which is like, you're encrypting these things, just check the box. It's important that you do it in case this happens, but this is not the end of your encryption journey if you are trying to secure data or keep it confidential from prying eyes in some way. You have other layers of encryption you need to consider. when you're thinking about the data and thinking about the threat. So like, what are you protecting against? So I think reframing the issue to say, you know, what are you actually doing with the security control as opposed to putting the security control in for that particular case. And I think, you know, for me, it's reframing the issue for me is kind of thinking about how to lean on other teams in what they're trying to do in order to achieve the security end goal. So, you know, we talk about paved paths and secure paths for developing software or for generating infrastructure because it makes it easier for developers or easier for engineers to create a secure product. But at the same time, I think we also need to consider, like, you know, that is not the end of the journey either. If the pattern doesn't work for a workload, then you have to reconsider what you're doing. You can't just try to force a workload into, you know, a paved path if it's not going to work. The path needs to change, or there needs to be an alternate that is, you know, reconsidered as a you know, a new security dynamic. So I think it's just it's another way of stepping back, I guess, but just thinking about how you can lean on other teams and lean on the solving the problem as opposed to applying the security control. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the funniest thing is when security designs the solutions for people versus going to the people and being like, okay, what do you need? Let's add the security to it. Yeah, like, I mean, if security people designed AWS, it would just be completely locked down and useless versus building something that's useful for developers and then layering security on top of it to make sure that it is secure. You know, you have to, we are serving people in our businesses or our clients or whatever it is. We're not like the end all be all unless you sell security, but we know security vendors have the worst security. So,
yeah.
So yeah, definitely have to think about it in a different way.
I don't know if, it's like that I don't know if we serve the when it's a client, sure, we're sort of serving the client. You're hired to do something, you know, in consulting, you're serving the client. But as a security team, I really think of it at, like, I want to get away from this, like, client relationship type of deal internally in teams, because I think that it really needs to be a collaboration, right? It's less about how do I make myself fit into this world, and also not about kind of what we'll talk about, I guess, next, which is like dying on your security hill, but working with the team and collaborating with them to fully understand what the problem is and then come up with a solution together. Meaning that just because you're a security person doesn't mean that you can't make a functional add to a product. And just because someone's an engineer or a developer doesn't mean that they are forbidden from making a security suggestion or decision on a product. So it's like, if you are working together to solve the same issue with security as an integrated part of this, then it's the full product, which is really what everyone wants. We all want a secure product. It's just that we're fighting, we are all serving different incentives, is what I would sort of look at it as. Is like, security is usually incentivized to, well, we've said it before, break stuff. Engineers are usually incentivized to build and move stuff. And so I think that security needs to think more about how can we move things securely, and engineers need to think more about, you know, how can we move things securely. We're both trying to move a secure product as opposed to one team focusing solely on one part of that. It needs to be more of a blended approach.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. It needs to be a collaboration, but I think that you can. I like the self-service model for security services internally at companies. So, for example, say the requirement is all credit cards have to be tokenized or encrypted. Okay, you say that to the entire company. Every developer is going to be like, all right, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it that way. You have terrible interoperability. Can't say that word. You have like a million different encryption implementations. You have really bad crypto, versus security being like, okay, we're going to create a service for you. You adopt the service, amazing API documentation, an SDK in every single language that you create apps in, and you've created a service that you're both aligning with the goal of the company to secure credit card data, but you are creating a service for them to basically take all the pain of being secure out of their hands and just giving them a really secure solution that they just can interact with and meet all their criteria.
Yeah,
so I think we have to think about it that way.
I like that idea of how, rather than applying security controls, how are you removing the pain of applying security from your engineering team or from your infrastructure teams? I think that's a really good way to look at it. I like that sentiment too. So to that end, if you're not doing that well, circling back, to use more business analogies, when we've talked about dying on a security hill, I think to explain that it's kind of having that security person that is very adamant about how things should be in security, or comes with a sort of a pre-rendered plan of what they think is going to be there, or maybe even picking the wrong security battle to fight because, and I'm certainly guilty of this, is just, if you have a passion about something specifically, maybe it's encryption, and this guy on LinkedIn posted this thing and you just want to die on your encryption hill, how do you make the decision of what security hill to hold and when to pick your battles? Do you have any suggestions for folks that might be listening?
Yeah, I think technical security people are really bad at risk. Like we talk about risk all the time, but we're like, oh, you're going to get hacked, you're going to get breached. Okay, like what is the actual risk? What's the likelihood of that happening? And then what is the impact of that actually happening? Like we think of it very simply, even though the actual risk is calculated in a much more complex way. And then I think we get obsessed with, I think whatever the news, even if you're a very experienced technical person, you get obsessed with like what the news is talking about. We spent, how many years was like TLS and SSL issues like in the news all the time? And obviously like Heartbleed, super terrible issue, super easy to exploit, something you need to patch right away. But then like we had 1,000 other TLS and SSL bugs that came out. They're like, in super specific conditions, when someone can monitor all your network traffic, and they have a supercomputer, and they have about a year's worth of time. But like that became a thing that went into every Nessa scan, and people spent like, so much time got eaten up by fixing some of these bugs, and we just get obsessed with these kind of like very low likelihood issues. And I mean, CVEs are another example of like it goes into CVE and it can shape the trajectory of a security program's destiny, like even a whole company, if they're just super focused on fixing CVEs.
Yeah.
So I think we need to think about what the overall risk is, and I don't think technical security people are that great at it, and I'll include myself in that. And I don't think risk people are good at talking about the tech or understanding the tech. So there's kind of a gap on both sides that we need to address. And then we just get into these battles of like, you have to fix this CVE because it's a high risk under the most remote, unlikely conditions ever, but it's a high risk, therefore you have to fix it.
Yeah. And it might be something, I think there's something to the tune of time and effort there, that when I think the indicator for me, when I sort of swallow my tongue, is when I'm on the verge of saying that someone should be doing something because it's a best practice, or because it's it's just because it's the equivalent of it's how it's always been done, or it's how it should be done, because that means that we haven't fully quantified the risk that we're solving for. And so I think one of the ways to sort of reframe and to take a step back is to say, if you haven't taken the time to evaluate the issue, you are putting that effort of solving the issue onto the team. So you're basically transitioning the effort that you should have put into it as a security person onto the engineering team or the infrastructure team to solve the issue. And I think that you really, to be a good security practitioner, have to think through how this affects the product and the team, and almost work to disprove yourself, right? To like really think about how you can get around this. And I think it's a mindset that we already have. It's like we are already looking for how to compromise issues. And I think that I don't know if it's laziness or just maybe lack of skill, or it's just that we don't want to make a mistake. I think it comes from a good place in security practitioners, and to say the reason that they are so adamant about these things is because they want every layer as possible to be there, so that there are controls at every gate, right? That there is a way for us to protect against this if it gets through gate A and gate B and gate C and gate D, that like we still have E, F, and G. But I think to your point, when we over focus on a specific issue, we actually miss a lot of the other stuff, a lot of the more high likelihood stuff, just because it's either easy to find, or we know it's a best practice, or we are personally familiar with a particular type of attack or issue or vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, we get so focused on certain things, and there's a cost of the time that is lost by people just spending so much time on one issue that it may even be a high or medium risk, that if you just said, okay, we have a decent compensating control, let's move on to something else, versus having people dedicate months. I mean, there are companies, relatively large companies, that spend a huge amount of time focusing on one issue, can have multi-year projects fixing one issue. And yeah, we don't have a million security people in every company to focus on every issue. And I mean, I do think best practices are important, because like what you said, it's a layered defense. So one thing might not work, then you have a backup, then you might have a backup to that backup. And I do think best practices build up to being, a high important security control. But not every best practice is worth dying on that hill over. So you definitely have to figure out which ones you're gonna fight for.
Got it. Yeah, no, I agree. So we've covered dying on the hill, pick your battles. We've covered sort of reframing the issues, taking a step back, things like that. And we have about 8 minutes left if we want to keep this at our 30-minute mark. And I want to throw this out to you in terms of like how you feel about this statement, because I like it, but I think that it's going to be... Yeah, here we go. All right.
Nighttime Ken.
Yeah, my light ran out of batteries. It got real dark in here, and the mood has been set. So I like the statement that that security and engineering is not like, you shouldn't be compromising. There's no trade-off or compromise at all. That if you are unable as a security team to achieve your goals without forcing other people to compromise, or without compromising yourself, you are probably moving slower than your competition, or you are moving in an insecure way. So to quantify that a little bit, what I mean is that really you should be moving together, because if you are sort of over rotating on security, and you are forcing other teams to compromise, meaning you are dying on a hill and a team has to compromise to get to you, if you're forcing them to do it in a compromising fashion, that they are probably going to shadow IT you, or end around the process, or undermine your security control. And then conversely, if you are compromising, meaning that you're accepting too much risk, or you're saying, well, that makes sense, and so we'll sort of shove this security to the side for the purpose of moving this away, or we're looking for ways to sort of justify an approach, then you are moving faster, but you're undermining your own security. So what I'm saying here is that the security solution has to be this joint effort. And that if you can find a way where no one gives up anything, which is like, if you can ask at the end of that question, have we given something up, or have we reduced our functionality, or reduced the security we set out to achieve, then I think you've failed, right? I think that like that is a mark of failure for me. So it's out there into the world.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think that. I think it's certainly a challenge, and someone could be like, okay, well, we can't succeed. We can't do all the things we want to do in security because we don't have an unlimited budget. People are pushing code out every 5 minutes, and we don't have enough people to do all those things. Which I think is somewhat of a valid rebuttal to part of it. But I mean, I think going back to what we were talking about before, I think what you're saying is you might need to compromise somewhere. One best practice might not be in place, but if overall you do have, a pretty rugged implementation of whatever you're building, and you're not compromising the overall security, then you can meet that statement, I think.
Yeah.
If you're giving up everything,
I think that's kind of my point. That's my challenge. Is there have you found the solution where no one gives up anything? And I think that if you have compromised in the process, and you haven't compromised the overall, because you said we don't compromise the overall security, then basically someone else has compromised to meet you there. And I think that we have the idea of like the security stick in financial institutions or government or things like that. But I'm really like, especially in the Web3 and blockchain side and with like more modern organizations, I think that folks are more willing to collaborate on a solution, and I think that it's maybe easier to achieve something like that because there are folks that are sort of working on creative solutions. I'm kind of trying to think of like, when you take that step back, what is the thing that no one is seeing? How do you figure out that way forward? And I think that's where new products are built and new innovations are created in terms of like how we solve security problems. But, what if somebody were to say, hey, what are we trying to protect here? And it's the confidentiality of data. And someone was like, well, we don't need to encrypt. We don't need to click that encrypt checkbox because we're doing it in this other way. You're not, you're not compromising the encryption. You're not compromising the functionality. What you're doing is solving the security problem and sort of trying to figure out what is that creative solution? What is the other way that we can encrypt? If somebody comes to you and says, we're not going to click this encryption button, you don't want to say, okay, well, we can just accept the risk on that. To me, that's compromising. You want to say, okay, well, how do we achieve the encryption in the way that, like, what are we protecting? This is the reason why we want it. Can you help us find that encryption solution that's going to give you what you need? Maybe it's speed that they're, facing. Maybe it's like a logging mechanism. What do they need that they can't encrypt? And what do you need that you need to encrypt? And then what is the way forward that you both get those things?
That makes sense.
Okay. Oh man, come on! You got to fight me harder.
I feel like you're, you had the succinct version, then the more in-depth version is so much more reasonable. You got to keep hot takes to short hot takes and just go with it.
So when we post this on LinkedIn, it's just the hot take. Don't compromise.
Just the hot take. Don't compromise. Yeah, you sound like a pirate or something like that.
What do you mean?
Take no prisoners. No compromises.
I see. Yeah, no, that's true. Oh, my cat's joining us. So, I think that's the. Do you have anything you want to throw out there? Some debatable points, or hot takes?
Compromise. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I think security needs to. I mean, we talk about this a lot, but security needs to get out of its echo chamber and learn the technology, learn the people. Do rotations with folks. I don't think that's a hot take. I think that's just the fact of the matter of where we need to be these days. And yeah, stop being a security absolutist. All those words.
The security absolutionist. The security person that absolves everyone of all their security sins.
Yeah, exactly. That's the risk team who just says risk accepted. It goes in Archer. Someone else will deal with that once I quit.
There you go. All right, man. Well, I think that wraps it up on security compromises. I like the conversation. I think we hopefully are getting folks to think a little bit more about how to solve solutions or how to create solutions and solve problems together. And with that, we can end this episode. I know that it's been sort of long since we've last posted, but we've just had a lot of conferences. Mike's been on the conference circuit, talking about Terraform and infrastructure as code, and security and exploits and all kinds of fun stuff in the offensive track. So find a video online for that. Maybe we'll link some in the show. But that ends it for this episode, number 57. Again, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.